join me in welcoming Cannupa and Saisha to the MLK Library.
Woohoo! Go us! Well, thank you, Cannupa, for joining me on stage. Thank you, Natalie, and the DC Public Library and the MLK Library. This is such a beautiful invitation and such a beautiful space of vibrant community presence to see a work like this come to life, really.
It's amazing. I also want to share my gratitude. It's been, this is a wild place to do a thing, and but it felt right. And I just appreciate all of the effort and labor and care that went into allowing me to come here and engage.
So we're going to do a lot of time looping here, but before we jump back, let's talk just what happened right here. So we're here to launch SURVIVA, which is an artist book and an exhibition that will be in the lobby of the Public Library through September, and a performance that just happened, and some people in the audience were here for that, but some weren't, and you're still, sort of embodying the character. So can you, at
this is just how I roll,
the quickest level, give a little overview of what happened in the lobby recently, and some of your experience of that?
Yeah, for sure. So SURVIVA is a project that I've been wanting to do for years. My wife, Ginger, got me this survival guide. It's a field manual from the U.S. Army, in 2017, and simultaneous to having this book, I was flipping through the pages, and I was just like, oh man, all of these survival tactics that are in here, my aunties and uncles taught me. I'm like, this is all indigenous knowledge. And then I was 5 pages in, and the A in survival, it was one of these written poems where they run horizontal. The A says, act like the natives. And so I just keep thumbing through this book. There's teepees in it. I was like, all right, I'm taking it back. I'm taking back this book. And so the process of developing it is what I did in this 2-hour performance with these 2 pages. Those were pages that I didn't use in the book. We threw a lot of great pages out to develop the content of the book. But I was like...
And by pages, you mean the big banners.
The big banners, yeah. There's big banners
that reproduce pages.
Exactly. They're reproduced pages, so just printed onto canvas. And I thought, I could share the process of redaction and recontextualization and do it as a performance here. And in the process of putting this book together, there were all these little secret stories and things that developed. And so I was like, I'm going to embody this character who wrote this book, because I think of it as an artifact from the future. And so I was like, I don't exist in the future. I'm right now. So let me go to the future place.
So you've gone to the future place, and that's embodied in the performance. And you said something when we were talking about preparing for this that really struck me and I thought was so insightful to your practice writ large, but really specific about this project. So the military guide to survival is an instruction manual. It's like an illustrated how to survive. And then this performance is an illustration of how to take back that knowledge, how to take a militarized, extractionist worldview and change it, but also how you made this artist book.
Yeah.
And so how to suddenly popped up as this theme, and I thought we could talk about a lot of your work through that lens, and so that's going to be a little bit of our thread or rubric today.
Absolutely.
So with that in mind, tell us how to become a world-famous artist. No, how did you start out? We wanted to know, I just thought we could use it as a playful portal to how to start out in your field and how you started working with materials and how they grew to the multimedia work that you make today.
Yeah. Commitment goes a long way. Also, spending all of your money and getting the means of production. So I went to school at the Institute of American Indian Arts, and my last semester of school there, I went to school on an NEA grant, so I'm like, I don't know if you can do it the way I did it anymore.
I was like, rip.
But I went to school on that grant, and my last semester, I spent the entire thing getting a kiln, a computer, and a camera. And I was like, these are the 3 things that I use at this institution that I won't have after I leave. And I also bought a 50-pound bag of beans, because I was like, that's going to be everything that I'm going to eat until these things. No, it should have been. It could have been. Actually, I should have bought coffee beans and not the computer, strangely enough. The kiln and the camera were profoundly useful. At the point in which I was this is like 2011 is when I graduated. Social media is beginning to build and grow. It's not the thing that it is right now, but you could see that this kind of like dramatic shift. And as a sculptor, I was like, man, 98% of my work is seen 2-dimensionally. It's seen in print. It's seen, digitally on screens. And being able to take good photographs of the work was profoundly useful. I was starting to see that there were people who had better artwork than me, but I had a better photograph than them. And they were like, we'll take the good photo, Yeah. So that was profoundly useful. And then outside of that, it's an endurance game. I mean, it's, like I said, commitment. You kind of choose the path and you open up all of these possibilities, and you adapt to radical change over and over. And like, when you're starting out, it's a lot easier to take risks, and risk is a privilege, And so, becoming a father and all of this stuff, that actually incentivized me in a way that when I could take incredible risks, I didn't fully understand what it meant to care for something greater than yourself. And because I barely took care of myself, I was happy with like garbage, and I was like, whatever, I'm stoked. But becoming a father was huge as far as incentivizing and opening up the possibility of success in my life.
So beautiful. I mean, I was thinking about risk, and I mean, in some way, I was thinking about talking about ceramics. Like, I think if you look at your practice now, it might not be apparent that ceramic was a kind of initial core material, and that sculpture was where a lot of the work starts.
Yeah.
And so we're looking at an early work, 2013, Misconceptions of Native Americans but it says with destroying the stereotype, and so that was a performance, right? So speaking of risk, right? So you made a bunch of ceramics that had these stereotypes, and then you smashed them? Is this correct?
Yeah, I did. I didn't intend to. I was working with a gallery at the time, and they were so excited to sell this work. They were like, oh, we've got collectors that want it. And I just finished building like 7 stereotype boom boxes that were all based on native stereotypes. And in the context of the exhibition, I was like, it's strong. Like, they make sense. I felt bad and gross making some of these pieces. Like, some of them have like, chicken feather war bonnets on them and stuff like that. And I was just having this whole conversation around indigenous stereotypes. And my concept was, I was like, I need entropy to act on these stereotypes. I need them to fall apart. And yet, because they're ideas, entropy doesn't act on it in the same way. So I was like, oh, I'll put each stereotype onto a ceramic vessel, and then entropy,
And you'll be entropy?
Enter entropy. And then the gallery was like, super excited to sell them, and I got scared, honestly. I was like, ooh, outside of the context of this exhibition, I could see this sitting on like a wealthy I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico, so I'm going to say a wealthy Texan buying the work, and it's sitting on their coffee table, just reinforcing this stereotype forever, And so I dropped them. I was like, okay, last month of the exhibition, I'm going to outline them with a hard light, and I'm going to take each one of them, and I'm just going to let it go. And there was some incredible catharsis in that process of just letting go of the stereotype. And the museum didn't want me to damage the floor, so I brought a rock in from outside and put it on the floor and put a canvas over it, and I dropped these pieces onto that rock. And the lesson I learned was like, oh, that rock knows exactly what it is. You know, no question. That is solid. That is a solid rock. Yeah. And I was like, be like the rock. Like, you can. This thing just falls on you, and it shatters and collapses over how certain this stone was. You know, and so that seemed like a valuable lesson. Yeah. And I was like, performance. Look at that.
So then, like, activation comes into the work. So this is more work from that period and different kinds of playing out of stereotypes and their counter and how to work through them. And then a work that you're very well known for, Mirror Shield Project, is literally goes viral because there's a YouTube video that is a how to make a mirror shield. Can you talk about what sparked that project and why it was important that the how-to and the tutorial and the participation were baked in?
Yeah, so during the Dakota Access Pipeline engagement, Facebook Live became a thing. Like, it didn't exist, and then it existed all of a sudden. And so I was born in Standing Rock. I was born in a little town called Fort Yates. It's about 15 miles south of Cannonball, and like where this image is taken. My brother works for the EPA there, and so he was calling me and telling me what was shaking out, and I was like, what is going on? And then I go up there, you know, this camp, Oceti-Shikowi, just like transformed throughout the duration of this engagement at this site at Oceti-Shikowi. And then I was witnessing everything on my social media, you know? And it was early enough that, like, fake news wasn't a thing, you know? And it was just like, oh, there is the media. I'm getting information from news departments out of North Dakota that are absolutely contrary to what I witnessed 30 hours previous to the news in real time. And you know, in that, just the strangeness of sharing experiences at that speed made me start to think about social media differently. I'm 46 years old. I'm like barely invested in it, except that I understand it's important and that a lot of people use it. And I'm watching Facebook Live and just Facebook in general, and all of the shares and the comments and all of this stuff, and I was like, this is a river that is wide and shallow. You know, it's just the speed and the volume of information that can spread had very little depth, and you know, thoughts and prayers are fine, but like this is a call to action, you know. And so I designed these mirror shields. I made a video on how to make these mirror shields, hoping that I could spread a little bit more entropy on social media, and that folks who could not afford to make great donations or wanted to come, or all they had were thoughts and prayers, I was like, look, here is a very cheap way to make a shield. Here is a mailbox to send it to. And the people,
materials were really cheap too, right? This was something you could do at home with very medium skills.
Yeah, medium skills. The first set of them that I designed, I made them in the parking lot of a big box hardware store. And I used,
prove you could do it. You're like, this book.
And I was like, what materials do they have here? You know, and like, what's the minimal amount that you know, it would cost to do it. So that's kind of where that came from.
Steal that book, kind of, you know, like steal this book. It's like, it's a moment of a reminder that people can be activated and participate in politics at different levels, and you're not always a bystander.
Yeah.
The invitation to think, even if you're not all the way in Standing Rock, how do you participate in these systems? What kinds of creative contribution can you make?
Yeah.
And the way that the creativity becomes a call to, and the aesthetics are important here, right? So this is
not really.
I think they are.
Okay.
I'm going to disagree. So, like, I think that, so maybe not the aesthetic of the individual shield,
Right.
but the aesthetic of what it means to use a kind of peaceful intervention that is a collectively created low-fi technology to rehumanize, to force the police to be rehumanized in the moment of encounter, and then to be able to use that same piece to reflect the environment and evoke the thing you're trying to save, which is the water. There's a moment in the video where you sort of do this snake, right?
Yeah.
Or the waterway.
Yeah, and all of that was literally just a disguise. I disguised these as art so that we could get shields in the hands of water protectors on the front line. Like,
but there's a great tradition of that, right? Like, so that idea of using art as this umbrella that allows us to activate in different ways is a really important, I think, tool and thing that art offers.
Totally.
To our shared space.
You know, one thing that's interesting about it, it was an open source project, right? Like, I was like, here's how you do it. There was a group of kids in an 8th grade class in Oregon, and they sent a whole pile of shields. Like, their teacher was like, let's do this thing. And they were like, absolutely. On the backs of those shields were messages written to the people who would hold the line.
Oh, amazing. And I'll just say, like, this is still an idea that can be activated, right? There are ongoing encounters where something like this might really make sense again. And so just putting that out there, asterisks, you know, it's an open source technology to move into the next phase.
Yeah.
And I think for you, you said, like, this idea of suddenly inviting in participation beyond your own performative action you know, became an important way of working. And so after that, you have a series of projects that you call Counting Coup.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about these?
Yeah, so that whole, you know, I'm like not very good at making plans. I'm just like, do the thing, you know, do it immediately. We need to do a thing. And then I make mistakes, you know. And so even with the mirrored shield, the mistake that I made is that I gave an address that I had no idea would immediately be inundated with shields, you know? And I'm like, oh, crap, I needed...
Sorry, bro.
Straight up. And like, you know, it was a lot. And so for this next piece that I did, it was called Everyone, and I made another video similar to the how-to with the mirrored shield, and asked people to make a 2-inch bead to rehumanize data of missing and murdered Indigenous people coming out of Canada. This was like 2018. The Truth and Reconciliation Act in Canada was moved through the continent that allowed the mounted police and their data gathering to be accessible to the population. So they made a calculation themselves, and then grassroots organizations were like, that can't be right, let me do the calculation. And actually engaging with Indigenous communities up there, the number that they came to was like a perfect 4,000 lives lost from one set of period of time to the present when this was created.
And this is missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, right?
Yeah.
And so it's, you know, the disappearance is part of what makes it hard to calculate, but also hard to move on from, right?
I mean,
ways of memorializing are so important in that.
Totally, totally. And also just the understanding that our populations are already low, and when matricide is involved, it's not just the death of an individual, it's the death of a line, you know? There's a lot of pain and harm and hurt that needed to be engaged with. And when it's 4,000 exactly, I'm like, that's a data hiccup. Like, it's not 4,000 exactly, so what are you doing? Rounding up or rounding down, you know? And either way, if we're talking about lives, that's weird, you know? But I understand how data's useful.
Communities that had been impacted, or families or friends?
We've all been
or was it a
impacted.
wide invite?
It was a wide invite, and it allowed people from Canada and the U.S. You know, most of my network is Indigenous people, but it was spread, you know, to all different facets. The surprise thing was letters came with, you know, the beads. People would send like 8 beads, and there would be a letter, and it would be like, one of these is my auntie, one of these is my mom, one of these is my sister or my daughter. And it's where the mistake I made with this piece is that I fired the clay. And so once everybody made the pieces and they came in, I dyed each one and created this pixelated image. But because it's fired, it lasts. And so I still steward this to this day, you know? And the physical piece weighs 1,000 pounds. And no, it weighs a ton, 2,000 pounds. And it is so much heavier than that. And like
the weight of it,
yeah,
the whole thing.
Yeah. And even install and presenting it in spaces, like there are just these little insults to injury in it, like watching the installation crew hold these ceramic beads with white cotton gloves and so much care, just like breaks my heart.
Right, because it's more care than gets given to humans.
I was like, where were you? Where were you? You know?
And also even within relic, the stewarding of remains, right? Like we have these legacies of how we care for art versus how we care for literal remains.
Right.
So we have some stuff to look at in the way we offer care as institutions. Yeah.
Totally.
So this is a continuation of that that kind of idea of working.
Yeah.
And so the how to, like, there's an instruction video that goes out, a call to action.
Yeah, and all these projects, they're called Counting Coup. And Counting Coup, like up where I'm from, Northern Plains, like that is the highest form of kind of military engagement that you could do in combat. And what you do is you touch your enemy and you tell them your name, and they know you're not afraid of them. Nobody gets hurt. It is the baddest thing you could do. You know, like if you injured somebody, you hurt somebody, you've screwed up the coolest thing you can do, you know? And that was to face your enemy. So, you know, Counting Coup, I was like, this sounds great. If I'm dealing with data, like facing it and allowing our population to communicate that, I think is strong. Yeah. This next project, you know, like I said, I'm learning as I'm going along on all of this stuff. This next project, something to hold on to, was, it's over 9,000 beads, and it was looking at data gathered on the US-Mexico border of lives lost, people coming to the United States. And I worked with a couple of artists who are Tohono O'odham down in Arizona, and their reservation is on the US-Mexico border. And while this wall was being built, they were like, we'll never build one here. Like, it bisects our place. So the state and the country built like checkpoints around their reservation. And so I'm like, oh, this is weird. Now it's like a quasi-national, yeah. And you have to go through all these checkpoints to get through. The vast majority, because that was gonna be that way, and because the tribe was located in that area, US policy is to funnel people through their community because it is the hardest part of the desert. And so they're using the environment to police movement and migration of populations that have moved and migrated from time immemorial. And their community is bearing witness to like something like 70% of the lives lost, you know? So we did this project and we asked people to squeeze clay in their hand. And this time I didn't fire it. And we made a labyrinth that you can see in this image. And
is that immersive? Can you walk through it, or is it something you view from the outside? Yeah.
Yeah, you walk through it, and it leads you to the center, and you have to turn around and leave. And I wanted people to understand, the general museum goer population, to understand what a border is, you know? I'm like, the agency and the freedom that you have to navigate a space is so much different than this. Yeah. And now I've made a border of lives lost that as you enter into this, you have to bear witness to it, and you don't cross the line, you know? So all of that worked really well, and I got to put this clay back into Arizona soil and let the rain wash each one of these. There was 2.5 miles of clay beads just held.
2.5 miles. Once
That's
you line up all
miles.
those, that's wow.
Yeah.
And so this cyclicality of materials becomes something that I think is also really important in the body of work that SURVIVA is part of, and that really sort of gains steam around this time. So 2019 is when at least I first start seeing exhibition of the work that goes under the rubric of future ancestral technology. And so here you can see an early installation, and it's got ceramic elements, but it's also starting to bring in this very strong ethos that we see in recycling the book or finding of looking to past materials, found materials, things you can find at the like fabrics, or I mean not thrift store,
wherever
and
you can find it.
Making from the things you find, and not just the ceramics or the materials. And I'm curious, this is also around the time I think the book comes into your life. So were you co-thinking about them then, or were these two different things that are happening? Like future ancestral technology is building as a world, and of course, can you talk about that world a little bit? And then like, is SURVIVA also, is the book kind of prompting some of that, or did they come back around?
The book didn't really prompt anything except that when I got the book, I was like, oh, I want to mess with this book, you know? I want to fix this book. And
so then what sparked Future Ancestral Technologies as a world-building project?
This body right here, this is the one who checks and the one who balances. And they are based on our Monster Slayer twins. These are Mandan stories. And I started seeing all of these archetypes between like Monster Slayers. And there's a lot of twin stories, but even in Greek mythology and all of this sort of stuff, this archetype of somebody readying the world for the world to face its monsters and annihilate them, or
radical rupture.
Exactly, and so these two figures, they're made out of one of them's made out of body armor that was used at the Dakota Access Pipeline police riot gear. And then the other one is the gear. I emptied like Albuquerque's sport equipment places and hauled all of this sports equipment up to Standing Rock during the Dakota Access Pipeline. And I was like, put it on. It may be really stupid.
If it can help hockey players, it can help us.
Exactly. And I was like, it's better than nothing, and then felt absolutely ridiculous when you face a wall of riot police, like just in lockstep with one another, and you're wearing used sporting goods equipment. You have this moment where you're like, this is not going to end well, So I bought the riot gear, and what I realized was riot gear is not designed for dynamic movement. It's designed to move all in lockstep and together with one another. But the used sporting goods equipment is like, dude,
you can dance.
You can dance in it, exactly. And I was like, this is pretty interesting. So I had these two sets of armor, and I used them to be the core basis to create these Monster Slayer twins. And then from that moment, I was just like, sculptures, static sculptures. I can make things I can wear, and I can activate it in video and then represent them as static figures afterwards. And that just opened up a whole new facet. And so Future Ancestral Technologies, which are, it's these like indigenous speculative fiction. I'm really interested in indigenous technology that has not been allowed to move through material science, that has been deemed primitive, that has been co-opted and rebranded as green economies. Like over and over, I see our technology, and just like the book, where it is, everybody's trying to make $1 and they need proof of concept. And I'm like, dude, you got 20,000 years of proof of concept and you're trying to sell a 5-year plan on your bullshit like green economy business? Tell them where you got the idea from, And
then you can trace it back.
Exactly. And also for indigenous people, it's...
Maybe you could credit.
Absolutely credit, but even without credit, like growing up and all of my heroes being ghosts is hard, you know, that all of my heroes were sepia photographs, you know, or they're fictitious characters, you know, that I'm like hoping is native, you know.
And even the fictitious characters, I mean, we can't go down this sideline, but the amount of characters in sci-fi who are based on indigenous, like the native that gets put forward and then still is misrepresented,
right,
and, and has a funny accent
or
and all of that. Like
weirder than
can't
that,
even live in the future properly.
every single alien.
Yeah.
Like, let's take into consider that Westerns just turned into sci-fis, you know, and pioneers turned into astronauts, you know.
So
the
you decided to make
Indians.
your own sci-fi universe, really, right?
Yeah,
So,
and to present a idea for the future, not like what I love about speculative fiction is that all of these possibilities are true, and that complexity is actually what makes us profoundly intelligent as a species. And most of the sci-fi that I grew up seeing moved towards homogeny. And I'm like, dude, homogeny will wipe you out. Like blight, you know?
monoculture.
It's never gonna work. What you need is complexity and diversity and local specific adaptations and like languages and cultures that develop out of that. How do we acknowledge and recognize our diversity through a collective celebration of that being the greatest source of our intelligence, you know, not the homogeny. So this is a future.
Right.
It's not the future. And I'm like, what would me and mine do adapting to all this stuff? So even using the recycled materials, to go back to that, I was like, oh, the crap of our present, the detritus of consumerism and capitalism is gonna be in our children's futures.
And it's going to be the seed of whatever we build next.
What do we do with it? And can we do something better with it than reproducing other versions of it, you know?
So I'm going to take us forward, and we're going to watch 1 minute that is from one of the earlier videos, and it actually sets up, you know, there are many versions of future ancestral technology, but this one sort of introduces the time scale that you're thinking of, and the sets up kind of where these figures go, except it's disappeared.
I like that.
Can you hit play, Maurice, on this one? Can you hit play? Oh, thanks. With sound. So just to say, so this, oh, there we go.
They created huge ships, and in the process mined massive chunks of our planet to develop the raw materials into these arcs. They left a lot of devastation behind, but what they took with them was this notion of colonization. The colonizer has left. What remains here are the indigenous populations, or those too poor to afford a seat on that ship, those who work the earth, those who remember still the songs that ring and tell us that we belong to it rather than it belonging to us. We're developing new cultures from that space. There are new ceremonies that are being created. These ceremonies, they start off as rituals. Individuals going to locations of heavy extraction, going to places that have been corrupted and injured by the efforts of the colonizer to leave this planet. And we go there in our human form and apologize. We say we are sorry. We are sorry for the human species. And with these ceremonies, new regalias are developed. Regalias that blind us and make us deaf and prevent us from talking. They remove all the senses that we invested in as human beings and force us to feel once again. Where the land itself becomes the choreographer of elaborate performances and dances. falling.
You can pause it there. I think my clip didn't work. But I find that voiceover so moving every time because it brings forward both this idea of intense destruction, but also an opening that is made to actually start with another worldview and with another way of creating. And so then to have this entire art project and world of sculpture and regalia making and performance and video unfold from that and sort of teach us, and this is back to the how-to, speculative fiction teaches us how we can work with what is here in the present to shape a different kind of future. And so I think of all of these projects, even if they don't have participation, as a kind of how-to that you're offering to the people who come in and think with it.
Yeah, I'm profoundly aware of hyperstition, right? This phenomenon that takes place when an idea is presented primarily in like science fiction, and it gets broadly amplified and presented, people just start building towards it, you know? So your submarines, your iPads, all of these sorts of things came up as like an artistic idea that we all collectively saw over and over, and we just moved towards making that happen. And I'm like, can we quit with the Mad Max? And can we get into like us having a sustainable future narrative so we can collectively move towards that idea? And so that's kind of the trajectory on the how-to. I'm like, can we imagine alternatives?
And that fits perfectly with as these installations evolve. There's the regalia that is the mythic figures, the ways of repurposing and growing from this space. And then there's also these ceramic ruins of sort of like killing the monster and leaving behind corruption and harm, and sort of allowing those to become relics that, you know, maybe we discover in the desert and, you know, go, what was that? Why did we do that? So, you know, it's just been really, you know, one after another, these new kinds of ways of thinking. And so here, the different silhouettes of these regalia figures, you know, have relationships. So some, you said, are monster, you know, these twin monsters. Some are invocations of animal figures or, you know, models, scavenger animals as ways to live and recycle in a different way. Think about how you work with what's there. And then you're also teasing out like habitation, transportation, right? So again, like instead of Mad Max's vehicle,
Max.
How do we move through this space with a little bit of a brighter look? But I'm moving through these a little quickly because I want to get back to SURVIVA. So all of this is, you know, this world building is happening. You're making these videos, you're making these sculptures, and at some point you do come back to this book and you apply so much of that kind of creative practice, thinking about starting with this material and how do you work with it and turn it into something entirely new, almost an oppositional worldview, or I will say an oppositional worldview. And then it also becomes actually a compendium. It's almost, everybody should get this book, it's incredible. But within it are the philosophies of the videos, texts from the videos, the silhouettes of the figures. So let's get into it. Let's talk about it. So what was your process?
So
when did you start coming back?
You know, I've had this thing sitting on my shelf. I keep flipping through the pages, and I'm looking at all of these things, and simultaneously, I'm developing this whole future ancestral technology narrative. Also, I'm beginning to like become successful, and that's a whole nother weird thing that like people, you know, I hope you become successful, and also I'm sorry that you've become successful, you know. This gap started to spread between people that I considered community and audience, you know, and it felt like a gap. It felt like it was getting wider and wider, but the reality is that I didn't lose anybody. It just, all of my artwork, things like those ceramic boom boxes that you saw at the beginning of this, like, I don't know how many people were like, I should have freaking bought that when I saw it the first time, you know? It was accessible. My work is no longer accessible, like, as far as an object to live in a person's home. And I was like, dude, my community doesn't get to have any of this Future Ancestral Technologies work because they can't afford it, because I'm a part of an economic system that is terrifying, you know, that it is stabilizing capital with objects that I make. You know, the most cynical version of me is like, oh, these are safety deposit boxes at this point. What about all of the cultural content? What about sustaining these visions and this important? How does this become a part of the canon and actually travel through space-time? How do I deposit it in a museum as a time capsule so that future generations can potentially access this? These are all my weird questions that come along with success. So this book, I was like, oh, I can make this book into the like catalog of the characters who've been maintaining this cultural practices through under all of this weirdness, and create an ethos and a visual representation on how to allow culture to survive just about anything. And it's through maintenance, you know? It's not preservation. It's not the model that we operate in primarily.
And you're sitting in front of it, so just the redaction, because it speaks to what you're saying, is your wits, right? So survival is all about your wits, and like thinking about how do you adaptively and responsively and think about the other ways that the thinking could get into people's homes. You're using that.
Totally.
And on the other side is an original page, so just so you can see the relationship between the first text page and the way you redact to get out what you want the message to be.
Yeah, and what the hell was all of that other words, you know? Like, if you can reduce that entire page, will you go back?
Yeah.
And I'll read it aloud, because this is a great lift from my brother and comrade in putting this whole book together, Eden. It says, your wits. This is a major lesson in survival. Remember that. What is all of that? Like, if you need an introduction to survival, I'm like, it can be reduced to this one line, and let that ride. We could have blacked out the entire book and just left that one line, you know? But this is the methodology. It's like, it's how can we reduce, it's also commentary on just like the redactive nature of our present, you know?
Access, right?
I mean, politically, I am very excited that this book is coming out now. We've been working on it for ages. And for it to come into this moment where our governmental policies are like, redact, redact, redact. And I'm like, dude, you can't put the cat back in the bag. I'm like, once when you had control and you just omitted completely, that's one way to do it, right? Like, to ignore and to make secret cultures and peoples. But once it comes out, throwing a black box over it is not going to make it disappear. It is going to fill your imagination with all sorts of stuff. So I'm like, yes, let us fill it with all sorts of stuff, you know? Because I think that's the only way to survive into the future, especially as Americans, right? Like, we've been fooled that choice is freedom, you know? And so we get to choose between this or that, red or blue, Pepsi or Coke. I'm like, I want water. You want to know what real freedom is?
Clean
freedom
water.
To make choices. We get to choose. We can imagine all sorts of stuff. Things that are so outside of the scope of what you get to choose or don't get to choose. I'm like, let's come up with some alternatives. Let's dilute the soup with so many ideas, you know, so many contrary things. And that, I think, is like truly what is special about us as a species. As one of the myriad living things on this planet, we can make some shit up. and then make it happen. Like, do not let them steal that from you.
Yeah. So speaking of remaking worlds, so these are two images from the book, and you can see there's sort of like two valences in which you're working with figures throughout the book. So there's the kind of stock everyman character, and I say stock everyman in quotes, obviously it's a white, militarized, like Boy Scout figure who's doing things throughout, and you've slyly re-indigenized in the way that actually you've got the markings now, and you do that throughout, long braid, etc. And so you're just sort of like very like tweaking those images.
I just put braids back on all of these cats. I was like, dude, this was done in the 50s and the 70s. My dad was is a Vietnam veteran, and I just started thinking about like how many braids got cut off at that point, like by native and non-native alike. I'm like, how many braids actually got amputated during this era?
1970s, yeah.
And so I was like, there's no problem here. They just knocked the braids off. Let me just put the braid back on. And doing that on an image was so, it made me giddy.
Sounds like you had a lot of fun.
Oh my God, every single time. I was just like, oh, and there's a braid back on him, and look.
And you did that right in the lobby. And it was, literally one of my colleagues leaned over, she goes, the braids were added, right? Because it seamlessly
The braids were there the whole time.
They were there the whole time.
They were there the whole time. They omitted the braids.
And then the other layer is this silhouetting of the regalia mythic figures. And sort of towards the end of the book, there's a moment where you sort of open up or think about that relationship. What is that temporal space-time relationship between these two figures? And I wonder if you could talk about that. I think that opens up a lot of how the book operates.
Yeah, so this character that developed by recontextualizing these drawn images, I didn't know was going to have a story arc. Like, until we were starting to put the whole book together, and I'm putting braids on them, and then I start putting the cheek paint, which is, this is like old school cheek paint, but it's, you would create like a sunburst everywhere your joint was. And I was like, well, I'm going to do a lot of jaw work today, so I better put the starburst on. But so I put them on these characters, and as it started to develop, there's the illustrations of the regalia that are trying to be tried out in this process, and then this character that sat in it, I was like, oh, he has his own kind of story arc, and there was a moment in the book where he puts on the regalia, and it's really similar to the image that you see over here, but. Get the book, see the transition, it becomes pretty blatant, and the whole book shifts from that point. And just that there was this little story, all of this regalia, some of them are based on buffalo regalia, there are coyote, buzzard, there's these monster slayers. All of the regalia is like ceremonial in its presentation, which means it's a technology that I'm trying to celebrate that's embedded in a cosmology. Any animal regalia, the technology there is more than human kinship. We acknowledge and recognize that we are not any better than anybody else, but together we're incredible. And we pay attention to the other living things in the world to draw inspiration from. Buffalo is a profound technology. Consider that there were 65 million bison roaming across North America before they were annihilated. How do you get that much biomass and not destroy the place in which you roam? Like, pay attention. That's a profound technology, Buzzard. This is buzzard here. Buzzard survives off of everything that's waste. He eats poison and sickness and survives. I'm like, there's a lesson to be celebrated and acknowledged and recognized with Buzzard. It's not the horrible, creepy bringer of death, but rather the cleanser of death, And I'm like, how do we change our relationship with death, and how do we celebrate adaptation and transition?
And I love this combination, this layering. So there's a number of quite beautiful chapters of closely rendered, observed, natural, nature that you can eat, and how to capture water and all this, and it's beautifully drawn, and clearly somebody's paying attention. but it's all cast deeply extractively. It's entirely like, how can I use?
Mm-hmm.
And Buzzard is a figure that had shown up, in video. It's also fun. Like, I felt like I was seeing like familiar characters. I was like, oh, there's Buzzard, because that's a video from a couple of years ago. And so then to see him layered over, but Buzzard is a different model. It's like already in the circle and already working with the pathways of reuse, death, recycle through that.
Oh yeah.
Rather than this extraction, and to bring those two together and say like, same idea, right? Like you're taking the native idea and you're missing the part where you're in reciprocal relationship, and I'm gonna bring that back.
Yeah, and simultaneously, you're gonna die.
Yeah. Warning.
And
all the survival work.
nobody. Life is challenging. Everybody. Nobody gets out alive.
It's my favorite Onion headline.
I mean, it's incredible. So, even through this like produced narrative of extraction, I am like, dude, you are just borrowing everything, like the air you breathe, the water you drink, the dirt you own. I'm like, it's all borrow, and something's gonna take it back,
And this is just one of my favorite pages. Natives don't. So I am very curious what that page said before.
Yeah, it had all sorts of things. Mostly it was like, don't take offense to jokes. Native people like to joke, and I was like, that's legit, but also, just don't,
Just don't.
Yeah,
Also don't make jokes.
There were all of these. The funny thing, this is a chapter in the survival guide, and it was all based on like, how do you interact with Native people? And it's like, don't sleep with their women, like, don't. I'm like, yeah, dude, fucking don't. Like, just don't, okay? If there needs to be an 8-point list of things you probably shouldn't do, I'm like, we'll just start with don't, okay? Like, before we get into the nuances of anything that you think might be okay, don't. Don't 8 times in a row, okay?
Yeah, sorry.
And then it says, it could happen. The important question is how, And I'm like, just start from don't.
I love the way you work with redaction through this to make these just like unbelievably pithy, insightful. It's masterful. But I was also, I just, as I said, seeing the silhouettes and the buffalo regalia come in through that moment. And then, as I said at the end, there's the, he takes on the regalia, but there's also this invocation to portals and time travel. And the other thing that I really appreciated throughout the book and throughout future ancestral technology in general is that there's this kind of insistence that that sci-fi, time travel and time not being linear, that's an understanding that was embedded in indigenous thinking that is now, being embraced as new science, theory of relativity, and to insist that the, language of science, the advancement of, transmission and all conduits and communication, this is all already indigenous, and that refusal of the primitive historicizing ideas of what native knowledge could teach you. It can teach you how to make teepees, but it can also teach you about time travel.
Yeah, I'm like, you got a 47-page dissertation. We've got a symbol, I'm like, we got a shape that actually describes all of that, and you can paint it a variety of colors, I'm like, yeah, you're catching up. You're catching up, and it's good. It's real good. One of these days, it's not about relativity. It's about relationship, Yeah. I'm like, everybody's looking to the smallest molecule or the furthest star, and they're like, each one of these little bits is the most important part of everything. And I'm like, yo, you just bypassed what most of the universe is made of, and that's relationship. It's hard to see. You got to do it. You got to enact it. You got to participate with it. And that, I'm like, that's it. It's mostly relationship,
And that brings us
particles floating in relationship.
And the relationship then between this future ancestral technology time, the mythic figures to the, figure that they're looking at, they're like kind of looking back and to, a seed that gets planted that becomes what they then can make of it in the future. And so you've really taken us through that whole journey by the end. I wanted to show also how these regalia, you've made them on green screens that can project, so they can be projected on any landscape, but there's also an augmented reality version of these, so that you can go around and sort of like place and make portals throughout the world as you move through it, imagining that any of these areas can be re-ritualized, reenacted. They can be these time-space portals.
I'm literally a con artist. Like
Okay.
that's, it's a long game. It's a real long game that I'm playing here. But these regalia pieces, customarily they're designed to call buffalo. Like this was the practice. You don the regalia, you dance on the land, and buffalo return. And I was like, we've maintained this all the way up to present. How could I get Times Square to call buffalo back, And I was like, so I'm gonna film it on a green screen, or I'm gonna make an AR thing. Like, I'm gonna do all of these things that are like accessible and people don't even know what's going on. But my goal is we're gonna get buffalo back. And I'm gonna do it the way my ancestors did it. We're gonna call them. We're gonna call them, and I'm gonna activate them in your backyard, in your front deck, on your tiny piano. You can put a little augmented buffalo dancer on there. And in that way, behold, buffalo return, and then maybe we'll be able to ask them the right questions around how do you survive in such great numbers and not absolutely destroy the place.
Okay, well, speaking of questions, we're going to turn to audience questions in one minute, but I'm going to ask one last question. Speaking of buffalo, you've done a series of works thinking about the active genocide of the buffalo that was done to also actively genocide Plains Indians as a war tactic. So this is a video earlier. This was a sculpture that was in downtown New York, attrition, right? So thinking about wars of attrition. And now you're working towards, this would be a continuation of Counting Coup, another participatory version, and now you're working towards a memorial for this. And I wanted to invite you in a town that's very invested in memorials to talk about how you're thinking about memorialization slightly differently for this. And then, you guys be thinking about your questions now.
Monument and memorial. I've got to work with my good friend who's here right now, Paul Farber and the Monument Lab team. But just like opening up the questions around what a memorial is and what a monument is and what permanent is. These are all the questions. Like, we've got some really great slabs of marble here, celebrating a Greco-Roman history that never existed here, which is fascinating. And the perpetuation of that subconscious narrative, like, it sits in all of our heads. But if you're from these places, you're like, it's so thin. It's so thin, This has not been here that long. I'm working on a project to develop a war memorial for bison, but I don't want to come in heavy-handed and make an imposition of a monument in a place without the place having any sort of say. I don't even know the place right now. I know it's North America, I know that's the place, but where in this place? And I've started doing calculations around what does 60 million buffalo look like? Like, can anybody comprehend that in their head? So I grew up seeing skulls stacked in pyramids from old sepia photographs. And it wasn't until later that I was like, why did they stack skulls? I was like, this country don't do nothing without $1. So somebody got paid to stack skulls. Why were they stacking skulls? They were burning them down. They were burning all of these bones because all of these bones were actually inhibiting Western expansion, because along the train lines, as far as the eye can see, there was a point that all you saw was a winter's frost made of buffalo bones. And people were like, no, I'm going back to Massachusetts. It's crazy out there in the West. So they started burning them all down, but I'm looking at these stacks of skulls, and I calculated, okay, let's say a buffalo skull is, and this is smaller than it is, but let's say a buffalo skull is 1 cubic feet. What is 65 million cubic feet? It's even still it's hard to comprehend. I figured out that the Empire State Building, if anybody's familiar with that classic architecture that, you know, sits in all of our minds, that's 33 million cubic feet. So imagine a tower of skulls twice as tall, just the skull. Like, that is insane. And now if I want to make a monument for people to comprehend that scale, what do I got to do? Carve a mountain? You know? And I'm like, I don't want to carve another mountain. I saw them do that with friggin' Rushmore.
Yeah,
I'm like,
no
it's
more
insulting, you know? So do I have to push Earth and make it that scale, you know? I'm like, well, that's a lot of extractive material to be pushing
a lot
around.
Of land art.
I'm like, I need to figure out how to do this, and in the process of figuring it out, I need to work with a lot more brilliant people than myself, you know, to decide and design and develop what this can look like. And I think actually just having those conversations is a big part of what it means to memorialize, you know? Like, let's chop it up. Let's have that memory.
Okay. So do we have any questions from this beautiful, packed audience for our last 10 minutes?
I know, this is amazing.
Yeah, I'm just like,
I'm going to do a thing at the library. It's going to be cool and secret. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Hi there.
Hello.
Thank you for being here today and for speaking your words. Really like listening to your voice. One part of your voice I really like listening to was in the video that we played, talking about how after the ships were built and after the colonizers left, the people who were left behind were either the indigenous people or also the people who just like weren't rich enough to get onto these ships that were leaving. And when we kind of see the relationships between different groups of people today, I feel like we can see something pretty similar, where we have indigenous people living on the land, but then we also have other minoritized groups that just have gotten so much stolen from them. So my question for you with that context is sort of seeing the relationships between people in the land now. How do you see indigeneity evolving as the climate changes, as our systems change? How does indigeneity change?
Yeah. Ooh. Well, I mean, it changes because it is not a thing, you know? I think a lot of the trauma that we experience is that we have turned ourselves into a series of things, you know? I think English language had a lot to do with that. I think capitalism and consumerism, using language, has a lot to do with that. But we assume the world is made of nouns, and it's actually just a whole bunch of verbs. You know, these are processes, things that become. Indigeneity, there's got to be a point at which we recognize we're all from here. And now the mind shift is that it doesn't belong to you. Like, that's a hiccup, you know? And all the capital, everything that built this building, the continued threat of indigenous people, like in America, it's because all this wealth, all of that marble shipped over, all of the things, this is all extracted from the land, and our existence threatens that just by being here, just by being here. And they're like, I guess it really wasn't mine. So how does it shift? It shifts because it has to, and because it's a survival mechanism. And it's also, there's really, there is a recurring generosity that I've seen from indigenous populations across the globe where they are excited and willing to show you how to belong. You don't want to listen. People don't want to listen how to belong. They want belongings. Let me sacrifice belonging for that. I could probably just own it, you know? In that extension, there is, it hurts to be the owner, you know? Heavy lies the crown. All of these like narratives around control and dominion are making us sick. Like indigenous people are going to adapt because we have to. What I'm really excited about is how dominant culture adapts because it's sick. And I don't want to heal it. I think it needs to heal itself, you know? It has to ask these questions. How do I belong? I've been, you know, all of this is trauma of that initial pain, you know, of not feeling like you're a part of place. And there was a point in all of our history where we worshiped the literal dirt, the earth. We saw the land and looked at it with reverence rather than simply as resource. And when you look at the world in that way, you understand that nimble kind of balance between belonging and belongings, you know? So how does it adapt? Any which way it can, you know? And through the process, it's gonna make mistakes. We're gonna see some real toxic indigenous worldviews, you know what I'm saying? Like, we're gonna see some things that aren't gonna work forever because it's not a thing, it's a process. And so until we understand that it is becoming, you know, and that it not is a thing, we're gonna keep running into the traumas of dominion and possession and ownership, because you can only do that to things.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm wondering why dance is a technology of calling.
I know, right? Because it always has been. Because everything is a gift in our entire universe, except what we do with it, you know? And so dance is and has been and will continue to be a profound way to celebrate and actually consume your own self, you know, as a celebration. You're making a sacrifice. Dance is dope, dance is beautiful, dance is cool. Dance will wipe you out, you know. It eats up energy, you sweat, you're thirsty, but it's also communal. And so when everybody's dancing together, it starts to resonate. And I think this is the same thing as, you know, choir singing, you know, any sort of like collective effort that moves towards a single purpose, it gets like amplified and profound. And dance is like this, you know? So dance will always and will continue to be a great way to focus collective effort. Yeah.
We have time for one more. So much pressure.
How did the rich Texans respond when you smashed the pieces of art they wanted to buy?
They didn't even get him. They didn't even get him. My gallery they were like, what? And I was also like, what? Okay, here we go. They were destroyed before they could sign the check, you know? Like, I don't know, galleries are funny, right? Like they have a Rolodex of people, and they're, you know, this is like early 2000s, you know, in the aughts, in the 2000 aughts. And I don't know, galleries are weird. They got lists of people who collect specifically from that gallery in particular. So the gallery owner is like, oh, I'm making my calls. Look at these things. I'm gonna show you images. But nobody signed any checks or anything like that, you know. But there was I knew exactly how much money I didn't have that I was smashing on the floor, you know. My gallery knew. That's how I knew. They told me, you know, and I was just like, I guess we're going to do that anyway, you know. But, you know, I was young. Even that video that you know, of me talking, it makes me cringe. Like, I was young when I did these things, and having a spoken narrative, I've removed that from my videos. I'm like, let me just put some shapes in space. And that, people can put any narrative, any storyline, you know? Because that one exists, it's also in the book, but I wished there weren't words in it, you know? And so there were a lot of things that I did that I probably wouldn't have done, except for that I was young and plucky, you know? And also, I had expectations around folks. And I have been, as I got older, I was like, I am just gonna remove expectations from my life. And then most of my life, I am actually profoundly surprised by what happens, you know? And I'm sure there would have been a moment of profound surprise if a wealthy Texan picked up one of those pieces. Like, I regret their annihilation presently, because I was like, now that I have a little bit more voice and say, nobody knew who the hell I was at that time, and I was like, this is just going to be a pretty object on the thing. But in the context of all of my work, those were pretty dope pieces, you know? I was like, they said a thing, you know? So you know, they definitely didn't lose any sleep. There were no Texans that lost any sleep over me destroying those pieces. My wife lost a little bit of sleep over me destroying those pieces. And I think about it now, you know, but I don't know, I'm always open for liberating capital from anybody, you know.
Okay, well, on that note, in this beautiful library that
Buy a
is
book.
Free space for all, just closing on this image, we survive you. Again, continuing this theme of there are just ways that we will continue to innovate and find ways to live on the land. So thank you so much, Cannupa, for this conversation. Thank you, audience, for being here. It's wonderful to share this evening with you.
Thank you all.